Okay. This shir is sponsored l'zecher nishmas of Shmuel Shmelka ben Rav Pinchas Neshama Shavan Aliyah. Okay. The announced topic was Shabbos in America. It's going to take us a little bit of background to get there. Let's start like this. I think after the video of the Chafetz Chaim coming to the Kristiyah Gedola, there's probably not another like such iconic video like the video of the Munkatcher, the Munkatcher Rebbe in 1933, looking directly at the camera and exhorting Yidden in America to keep Shabbos. Today it's already spawned several songs, and it's I think outside of that video of the Chafetz Chaim, it's probably not such a poignant video that can capture in one instant someone's personality and such a pressing cause. So the Minchas Elazar, just to understand that video, he was the Rav of Munkatcher, prolific Talmid Chacham, tremendous Mechaber Svarim, but he had no children until he was married in Pachas Yosser, let's say 1895. For 20 years he didn't have any children. He ends up getting divorced. He marries a second wife, and in the middle of World War I, he travels to doctors, and he has one child, one daughter. This one daughter is riding all the nitzchis, all the future of Munkatcher, all the future of everything he's investing in. When she was 9 years old, he started traveling around looking for a shidduch for her already. And in 1927, when she was 11, I think, she was engaged to Boruchel Rabinovich from Galicia. And in 1933, this was the wedding of the century. In the Chassidish Welt, this was the wedding of the century. The Munkatcher Rebbe's only daughter. It was the future. It was everything. The Minchas Elazar was, in learning Al Kapanim, the Gadol Hadar in the Chassidish world, a prolific Mechaber Svarim, a real kanoi, a leader of men. And at this wedding, a film crew from New York came down to film the town of Munkatcher, and they tried to gain entry into the Munkatcher Rebbe's house to interview him, to see him, to video him, and he refused. At the wedding itself, somebody explained to the Rebbe that whatever you're going to do in front of this camera will be seen in America. And then without a moment's pause, he turns, he looks directly at the camera, he lifts up both fingers and he says, Eden in America, eat Shabbos. That's his message, and he breaks away crying, and that's the end of it. This is you understand the moment that he's in. He had an opportunity to be mechazik, to exhort Eden in America to keep Shabbos, and that was his focus. Now, Shabbos in America was a tremendous challenge, but in most cities where Jews lived, pre-war in America, Toronto has one, there'll be a shul or shuls called Shomer Shabbos or Shomer Shabbos, where part of the charter of the shul was that you can't have a minyan before 9 o'clock. Because there was many, many shuls that felt like, listen, Parnasa, it's an einus, people need to work on Shabbos. It is what it is. In America, you can't make ends meet without working on Shabbos. So let's make minyanim for them. They would make hashkam minyanim at 5:30 a.m. minyan. They would daven. You could even go home and have a small suda. And by 9 a.m. you were in the factory or the office or in the shop or wherever you had to be. And there were many shuls and rabbanim afilu who felt that this was, what the time called for. There was no way around this. There's a tshuva from Rav Chaim, I forgot his name, a Rav in Hoboken, New Jersey. It's called Malki B'Kodesh. It's a multi-volume tshuva set. And in Chelik Beis in Tshuva Gimel, he has a whole maracha to work through how working on Shabbos is not a deraisa, and it's different for the kainim and the moichrim, and depending on what your job is, and to work through epis of leniency, some sort of gefeel that you got to work with these people also, and there has to be concessions to the need to work on Shabbos. So that was the America that we're talking about. Now, when I was sitting down to think about talking about this topic, so really it comes to you say this to Keshayla, are poskim in general looking to be machmer or looking to be mekel? What's the job of a posik? And obviously the question is, it's an oversimplification, and it's impossible to really be magda that. To me, it jumped off. There's I wouldn't call it a steer, but it's something so interesting to me. The Chasam Sofer in Ar Chaim Chelik Aleph has two tshuvas back to back. Tshuva Nun Tes is about owning a bathhouse on Shabbos, and in there the Chasam Sofer says, and he ends off, and this is something that in every sefer or kuntrus that's put out to promote a chumrah or to promote chumras in general, brings this Chasam Sofer as you see how the gisha of a pesach is supposed to be. The Chasam Sofer ends off and he says, Mikal Makim, miyadi lo teitze hira laheter. From my hand, a hira laheter is not going to come. V'alzeanu mispaulim. This is what we daven every day, he says. Shetei parnasaseinu beheter v'lei be'isr. We daven our parnasa should be beheter v'lei be'isr, he says. Ve'ena kavana b'lei gneva v'gzela. Shezei enu b'dei shemayim. To control yourself not to steal, that's up to you. You don't daven to Hashem, Hashem, please, I shouldn't steal today. That's not what it means. Shetei parnasaseinu beheter v'levis. He says what it means is aval kavana dvarim asurim v'nitzarach latir mishum hefsed parnasaseinu. We're asking is we shouldn't have to cut corners. We shouldn't be in a position where because of our parnasa or because of other things we have to cut corners. So Chum Sefer says, I'm not cutting corners. Now in any kuntris or maracha that you'll find from, let's say, any Hungarian rav worth his salt who's being machmir about anything, we'll bring this to some sefer as like you see what public policy is supposed to be. Literally, if you turn one page over, the next tshuva that the Chum Sefer is talking about a different shayla about houses that were destroyed and he wants to build them on Shabbos. The Chum Sefer says va'amnam va'vanisenu rabim hadar paretz kibika. The door is blown wide open like a bika. We need chizik. And it's the time, it's an opportune time to make a gather, to be shomer l'Torah, l'hachmer, v'lo l'haisif kula. To be machmer, not to be moisif kula. Ach, ani agever ra ani ami. I'm the man who witnessed the pain and the suffering of my nation. And al-kein amarti b'cholki agav n'koicha de'teira adif. Therefore I said, even though the dar is parrots and it's a shreklach time and there's makam v'chumrah, but I see the suffering and the pain that people are in, and I have to be mekel. And then he continues to make a whole kula, and then he davens v'lei kashal chas v'shalom v'hirava the ema milsa d'tiskabel. Says I'm davening that my tefillah is that I shouldn't make a mistake, and that what I say should be accepted. So it's literally like you turn the page, it's one way, turn the next page is something else, and the answer is that there is no right answer. There's not like a methodology like always to be machmer, always to be mekel. Always, there's no agenda to be looked for. There are situations and times that call for one response, and situations and times that call for another response. Now, as like a somewhat guiding principle that you see in the Paiskim brought down a lot, there's something from the Akedah that I want to share, and then we'll move on to some practical Zachen. The Akedah is Rabbi Yitzchak Arama. He's, I guess you could call him from the last of the Rishonim. He's from the Gedolim who were kicked out of Spain in 1492. He dies 2 years later. He was an old man already. He was actually a big lamdin. He believed in lamdus, which was unpopular in Spain at the time. Most of the svarim that were being written were not in that vein, that style. He was a lamdin. He wrote svarim on lamdus. But his sefer that's most popular, that's most iconic, call it, is the Akedas Yitzchak, which is a sefer on Chumash that's almost impossible to read. I think I mentioned it before because of the way it's set up. But in there, he has a maracha in Parshas Vayera or in Shar Chaf, depending on how you would find it, where he has a maracha as follows. He says, everybody knows the story of Sdaim, right? The Malachim come. Sdaim has laws against taking guests. Sdaim has extensive laws against anyone being nene from anything that's mine, even if it costs me nothing. And the Malachim, they finally get taken into Leit's house, and everyone surrounds them, and we know the story of Sdaim. He says, now, there's a famous tragedy. It's actually the first Shidduch crisis, not to make light of it, but it's the first Shidduch crisis that Klal Yisrael suffered. Is one of the most tragic moments in Klal Yisrael's history. In the end of Shoftim is the story of Pilagish Begiva. Now, I'm sure everyone's familiar, but I'll just say it over Bekitzer just to bring everyone up to speed. But the story of Pilagish Begiva is as follows. There was a man who had a Pilagish, and he was traveling. And, and his Pilagish strayed. She strayed. And they got into a fight, and she went home to her father's house. After a few days, he goes there to the Pilagish's house to try to collect her, to try to bring the Shalom Bayis back and bring her home. He says he goes. The Psukim tell us this. It's elaborate. It's in several. It's the whole parak you test through Chaf Aleph. In the end of Shoftim is all this. And the Psukim tell us that he went, and after a few days she concedes and she's ready to come home with him. And it's a several-day trip that they have to make to get back home to where they live. He's from Shevet Levi, and they're traveling. And when nightfall comes, they get to a giva which belongs to Shevet Binyamin, and they get there, and nobody wants to take them in. They're looking for achnas zarchim, for some food. Nobody wants to have them. Until finally the pasuk says, Zakin Echad comes in from his work at the end of a long day, and he says, come, you could stay by me. It says, so they go into his house, they stay by him, and not long after, the people of the city or some people from the city surround the house, and they say, give us this man who showed up so we can have our way with him. Very similar, almost a mirror to Sdaim. To which the host, the Balach Nasazarchim, says, no, it's not. That's very improper. That would reflect really poorly on us. I have a daughter, and I'll give you his Pilagish. You could have the two of them, and that should satiate your appetite. And the girl obviously doesn't want to go. The Pilagish does not want to go outside, and the man grabs her, throws her out the door, and the town does what they do. And in the morning, when this man is ready to go on his way, he opens the door and he finds the Pilagish dead on the stoop. He calls her. The pasuk goes into elaborate detail. He calls her. He tries to shake her awake. There's no response. She's dead. He takes her, he slings her over his donkey, and he heads back home. When he gets home, the pasuk tells us he takes a sword, he cuts her into 12 pieces, and he sends a piece, he airmails a piece of the body to each one of the 12 shvatim, and he says, look what happened here. Something has to be done, look what happened here. And says Klal Yisrael gets together, and they amass an army of 400,000 members. 400,000 chalutzei charev are amassed at the border of Binyamin. They gather together, and they come to Binyamin, and first they start civilly. They say, Shevet Binyamin, what happened here? This is unacceptable. Shevet Binyamin says, you're not the boss. Every Shevet has its own. States have rights. We're not talking to you. The Klal Yisrael demands, hand us over the perpetrators. So if it's not everyone and it's just a few people, so hand us over the perpetrators, and we'll do justice on them. To which Binyamin says, one for all for one. We're not. If you want them, come get them. So Klal Yisrael forms an army. They go to ask by the Urim V'Tumim, and Hashem tells them, go fight with Binyamin. So it says the first day Klal Yisrael amasses to battle Binyamin, and on the first day of war, Binyamin is crazy successful. Binyamin kills, I might be off by a few, but I think it's 22,000 soldiers from Klal Yisrael's army. Klal Yisrael is taken aback. They're completely shaken. They're doing the right thing. They're standing up for what's right, and then they go to the Urim V'Tumim again. They say, should we continue? And Hashem says once again, continue. Fight on. They go the next day, and Klal Yisrael again loses 18,000 soldiers. Together, 40,000 soldiers Klal Yisrael lost. One of the most tragic, one of the biggest bloodbaths in Klal Yisrael's battle history happens at the hand of Shevet Binyamin. The third day, the pasuk says they bring karbanos, they daven, they make a big yom tefillah, and again they ask, should we continue? And Hashem says, today go, and today I'm going to be Moshe and B'yadcha, you're going to be successful. And that day Klal Yisrael goes, and they set some kind of ambush that the pasuk goes into detail, and they wipe out close to 25,000 of Anshe Binyamin, which is the bulk of the Shevet, leaving over only 600 young girls, young unmarried girls. And that's why I say it's the first Shelach crisis, because the next few psukim deal with how to marry these girls off. That's when Klal Yisrael finally sues for peace and makes up with Shevet Binyamin. The question is, Klal Yisrael first makes a shvuah that no one's going to have anything to do with the girls of Binyamin, and how to marry them off becomes the Shaila. Now, the problem is, this is the story. Now, there's obviously some very, very clear mirrors to Stain. There's a lot of very clear similarities to Stain. So the Ramban, Al Torah, asks right away, he says, by Stain, Zakas Stain came in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Hashem sends Malachim, he turns it over, Gafris from Melach, without barely a mascaras of Stain, Ad HaYom Hazeh, he can't find anything as Stain. Over here, Klal Yisrael stands up to do the right thing, L'cher. They go to battle with Anshe Binyamin, and what happens? Klal Yisrael loses more men, ultimately, than Binyamin loses. Yes, Binyamin gets nearly wiped out, but Klal Yisrael loses in these battles 40,000 men. He says, Hayatachan, that Klal Yisrael stands up to fight with the current, Gilgal of Stain, and they lose men? How does that make any sense? So the Ramban goes on, and he tries to limit the avla of the Bnei Binyamin. He says, listen, it wasn't everyone, it was a small group, Klal Yisrael also had problems, and the Ramban goes, to limit them and to say how the Aveira was not as great, and therefore Klal Yisrael should have been more patient, they should have dealt with it differently, and everyone was punished. Ad Kedei Kach, that some Rishonim even say the reason why the book of Shoftim closes with this bloody chapter is to show the need for proper leadership. Because after Shoftim, we go to Malachim and we start with Kings. And even though Kings is has its downside, but to show that Klal Yisrael needed Ish HaYasher of Yasa wasn't working anymore. It led to a bloody civil war in Klal Yisrael. Now, the Akedah in Parshas Vayera, so he brings the same conundrum, this hilustira between the Hanhag of HaKadosh Baruch Hu to Staim and the Hanhag of HaKadosh Baruch Hu to Pilagish Begiva. And he has he takes him many pages to say it, and he builds it out from different sources. But his basic premise is that there's a big difference between Over Aveira, which there's always going to be. Of course, it's not acceptable, and of course, you can't just look the other way when someone is being over an Aveira. It says, but the fact that there are people, Yidden, who are going to do Aveiras Chamuris, who are going to violate the rules, that always exists. It's not... Yes, it doesn't impugn Klal Yisrael, it doesn't impugn a city, it doesn't impugn a Shevet, if there are Over Aveira in the Shevet. There's always going to be Over Aveira. He says what impugns a city or a Shevet or a society is when they institutionalize these Aveiras. When they say, okay, fine, our dar needs to do these Aveiras. Our dar, we can't. We have to be able to do these Aveiras in our dar. He says that's the type of thing that makes it impossible to come back from. Because once you build it in and you say listen, it becomes like a mitzvah almost. It becomes l'chatchila. This is what our dar needs. Our dar needs these Aveiras. Then you can't come back from it. He says, Staim institutionalized Aveiras. Staim said, this is richtig. This is the way it should be. This is how it has to be. Anybody who violates this, they're wrong. Aveiras are supposed to be. These type of Aveiras are necessary. said, Stam Hashem felt, there's no coming back from that. You institutionalize Averis and you say like, no, Averis is the way to go because our dar or our time or our city needs it. There's nothing worth, there's no silver lining. There's nothing to come back from. Hashem says, I'll be mapech the city, Gafris for Melach, there's nothing left. There's nothing worth salvaging. It says, Shevet Binyamin, that Kedah says, they were sinners. And yeah, they had a certain, irrational sense of loyalty to each other and they didn't want to give each other up. But overall, it wasn't institutionalized in Shevet Binyamin that you're supposed to do Averis. That wasn't like an institution, a creed of Shevet Binyamin that you're supposed to do Averis. So Klal Yisrael a little bit overreacted, and Shevet Binyamin a little overreacted, and one thing led to another, and it got out of hand, and that's why there's bloodshed on all sides, and Kila like nobody wins. It was a civil war, nobody wins. There's no winner. Everybody suffered. Because they didn't institutionalize Chet. Now, it's strange because this Akedah is a Sefer on Chumash. It's an Agadah Sefer. It's not a Halacha Sefer. He rather uses it for Halacha Shal that I won't go into now, but many poskim afterwards quote this Akedah. Some of them did not even see it. The Akedah wasn't even printed. Some of them just say, Kayadua, what the Akedah once said, or some of them saw it and said, the Akedah says over there. Some of them knew it, from the source. Some of them didn't. But you'll find it in many different poskim quoting this Akedah as like a guiding light to how to look at the need for chumras versus kulas. Meaning, an individual is struggling, a time that they're struggling, a situation that's a struggle. Of course, a Rav could use the Kayach Da'atera to be makel, to create a situation that's tenable for an individual or a kahila or a society that's struggling. But when a Rav will say, or a Paisik will say, this whole dar, listen, for us, these mitzvahs, or this set of mitzvahs, or these halachas are not relevant for us, that's a bankrupt philosophy. That can't be. Now, I want to use that as like a background, like a guiding principle for us as we go in and see different heroes of saving Shabbos in America. I think I'd like to spend one on Ramosha and one on the Satmarav. It might take us more than two just to flesh each one of them out. But these are two, each one in their own way, in their very different way, who helped bring Shabbos back to what Shabbos was supposed to be in America. Now, incidentally, the Satmarav was a close Talmud Chaver to the Munkatcher. So even though the Munkatcher himself never made it to America, his words did and his Talmidim did, and they certainly had an impact on the scene in America. Now, just to give a little historical background, let's take a few steps back. So in 2023, the summer of 2023, the Supreme Court agreed to take on a session right now for the upcoming summer session of the Supreme Court in 2023. The Supreme Court agreed to take on a case of a postman, a post office worker from Pennsylvania. His name is Gerald Goff or Braff, I believe. In 2019, after the post office made an agreement with Amazon to do their deliveries, the post office schedule got much tighter. They needed to increase deliveries on Saturday, and Mr. Gerald Goff was a religious man who enjoyed taking his Saturdays and Sundays off, and he wasn't interested in working then. And he kept having to change his schedule and find the replacement. And finally, in 2019, the post office in Pennsylvania fired him and said that your religion is an undue burden on our work schedule, and based on an old Supreme Court case from 1977, we're not obligated to satisfy your religious needs, and they fired him. Now, Gerald Goff sues the post office, and the court case winds its way up, and this summer it's going to be heard by the Supreme Court, and it could be a landmark case for frum people, because the idea of a company or a public or a private company having to accommodate Shomrei Shabbos is very relevant to it's the same shaila. Whether it's a Christian, whether it's a Muslim, whether it's a Jew, it's the same shaila. What amount of accommodation does a company, be it public or private, have to accord to Shomrei Shabbos? Now, it's expected to be a monumental case, and many amicus briefs, like Friends of the Court, I've been sending it in, and the Aguda submitted one together with Nat Lewin, favorite Jewish constitutional lawyer of everyone, and they submitted an amicus brief to the Supreme Court to support what they want the outcome of this case to be. Now, in it, Rabbi Zwiebel and Nat Lewin write, and this is what caught my eye, is the story of Jews in America cannot be told without understanding the battle that Jews had to wage for Shabbos. Meaning the history of Jews in America, who we are today, cannot be told without understanding the battle that we fought to keep Shabbos in this country. And therefore, moving that ball forward and getting to the next point is pashut like a natural progression. It's a part of the American story, the Jewish story in America, of allowing for true and complete religious freedom. And Mela, it's very, very important. This is what they wrote in their amicus briefs. Now let's just talk about this battle for Shabbos that they're describing in this thing. Now, just mamash mikufya, the immigration to America, let's say, of Jews really starts in the 1850s. It's Jews from Germany who were not all that religious to begin with, and the Reform movement becomes the primary movement in America. There were very, very few Orthodox shuls. Conservative didn't really exist yet. There was many, many Reform Jews in America, and most of those today have no Jewish enikach left. The people who came from 1850, those are, German names, Strauss, Lehman, etc. There's many of them. They came in the 1850s, hundreds of thousands of them, and they started the Reform movement. They were relatively organized in America, and they themselves began to push for the right to have Shabbos off. Not because they cared to maybe do malach on Shabbos, but because they didn't want to have to go to work on Shabbos. And they began to make a push that there should be laws for Shabbos to be off, not to be a work day. Just like there was laws passed for the Christians, in the early 1900s, the blue laws where they weren't allowed to have stores open on Sunday. They felt it should be the same for Jews, etc. And it was a whole fight. They formed, they banded together, and they began to battle. Now, in the 1880s is when, between the 1880s and call it 1915, the First World War, 2 million Jews from Russia came. Russia, Ukraine. Now, Russian, Ukrainian Jews did not have Reform where they came from. Reform with German and shul was as off-putting to them as being in a Catholic church. And even if they weren't religious, they weren't Reform. And then starts the movement of conservative Judaism in America, which is as a mix. Conservatism, some Orthodox, and they also begin pushing for a little bit of Shabbos. Now, in 1915, there's a Rabbi Bernard Drachman, who forms a committee for the keeping of Shabbos. I looked him up. He's at best conservadox. He might be conservative. He's at best conservadox, probably conservative, but he's already pushing and having rallies, and they joined together with the labor movement in America, which was pushing for unionizing and for better labor conditions, and this became a cause of the labor movement. Just like you can't make your workers work 14 hours a day, you also can't make them work on their Shabbos or their Sunday or whatever it is. And there was commissions, there was rallies, there was pushing. Eventually, strangely enough, even though he was a big anti-Semite, they got Henry Ford on board, who wanted his workers to have a certain amount of off, and he joined this movement. And slowly but surely, by the time the Second World War came around, there was the idea that a person could be off on Shabbos. Some of it was legal, some of it wasn't legal, but there was laws and minhagei akehila already that were leading to people being off on Shabbos. Now the problem is that in America there was many strains of Judaism. There was Reform, Conservative, Orthodoxy. Neither one. The Orthodoxy was by far not the primary strain of Judaism. It wasn't that strong. So even as Shabbos became off, shul attendance wasn't doing great. People didn't really come to shul that much. Okay, great. You want us that we could stay home on Shabbos. We're still not dying to come to shul on Shabbos. So in 1950, there was a landmark case that was passed in the conservative Jewish movement in America by three rabbis, allegedly at Bezdin, Rabbis Adler, Agus, and Friedman, who made a Bezdin that was called the Committee on Jewish Law and Standards. And in 1950, they published a landmark tshuva permitting driving to shul on Shabbos. That's when it started. The parking lots became open, and the conservative movement had never allowed driving on Shabbos. Driving was considered havara, was a deraisa. They permitted driving on Shabbos, but they said it's very specifically, you cannot, chas v'shalom, we're not saying that you could use a phone. A phone didn't really, a cell phone. Chas v'shalom, we're not saying that you could use electricity, or that you could even carry your wallet on you when you go to shul. We're just saying you could drive to shul. It's like a special heter that was given for driving to shul. You could actually download the whole tshuva. What's crazy about it is that it's written like a tshuva. And they bring, there's a Hebrew edition, an English edition, and they bring makairis and zushtels. I mean, obviously, if you went to yeshiva, it's not going to be very hard to be matcha some of these zushtels, but it's written like a real tshuva, and they make it like this, but with grace to shamranut, not just in general to be makel. We're makel just to drive to shul on Shabbos, because shuls need to be full on Shabbos. A Jew who doesn't go to shul, it's not going to be the same experience, etc. Now, just as like a master class in Zilusa de Shabbata, which is what they accomplished, in 1990, in Israel, there was a Bezdin, again, I say loosely, a Bezdin of the conservative, of the Masorati Jews in Eretz Yisrael, that paskin two things together. A family from I forget where now, maybe Petach Tikva or something, came to them and said that there's no shul that has mixed seating local to them, no egalitarian shul that's close to them. And Kayidua, for they're very uncomfortable to daven in a shul that doesn't have mixed seating. Could they be semich on the kula from 1950 in America and drive to a shul that's further away where there'll be mixed seating and they can be comfortable? And the Bezdin in 1990 in Eretz Yisrael paskin two things. A, the Bezdin in 1950 in New York does not have the standing to paskin for every conservative shul all over the world. They could only paskin for New York. It's not, you can't just paskin for everything. And B, their psak was a mistake. Because it led to a great misunderstanding about the Chaimer of Shabbos. People started thinking, and I can't imagine why they would think that, people started thinking that electricity is mutter on Shabbos, and that you don't really have to keep Shabbos, so it didn't really even help. Like, it just kept people home watching television instead of coming to shul in a car, so it was a misunderstood psak, and we really shouldn't be semach on that psak, and you can't drive to shul on Shabbos. So like, it's Pashut, it's a master class in how Zilusa the Shabbat works. Like, how misguided intentions in Zilusa the Shabbat works, where you say, like, listen, we can't. Driving, that's too much for us. And then you see, Pasha, it's not hard to see, that there are people in the Reform movement, in the conservative movement, who believe that in 1950, there was 850 conservative shuls in America. A huge number. Much more than Orthodox shuls. Today, that has dwindled down to much, much, much less. I don't know the exact number, but it's been on a precipitous decline ever since then. And there are many people in that movement who feel like the straw that broke the camel's back, what really did them in was this psak. By breaking with halacha and showing that, like, we're not kafuf to halacha anymore. When people think, like, oh, okay, so if we're not kafuf to halacha, so like, why am I stopping here? Like, I might as well just go a little further. It's more comfortable. And there was really no makom for this like middle ground, and that became like the undoing of the conservative movement. Now, b'chol eifin, in this environment in America, in this type of environment of Shabbos, is where Reb Moshe, the Pesach Hadar from 1950 until 1980s. Was stepping in. Every shaila that came to Reb Moshe V'Hilchos Shabbos during those 3 decades was in his mind framed in light of this background. In light of an America that had battled for Shmir Shabbos, had battled for the ability to be Shomer Shabbos, but was still challenged by all these different movements and all these different options and had never really succeeded in becoming Shomer Shabbos, is where Reb Moshe came to look, at every shaila that was presented to him. Now, there's a whole bunch that I want to get into, but I see I'm going to be a little bit limited for time. So I'm going to do one that's a standalone, and we'll Mitzvah continue Reb Moshe. It will take us more than one to get through all this. But let me do a standalone one, because this one's mamish fascinating to me. Everyone's familiar with the Eruv Shaila, right? About making Eruv in big cities. Reb Moshe, Kayidua, held it was a problem, was an usher to make an Eruv in big cities, be it Manhattan, be it Brooklyn. Moshe has many chuvas about it. Kayidua, in the Chassidish Welt, this psak wasn't so well accepted. Reb Menashe Klein, in Mishnah Halachas and Chelik Hey, has most of the volumes about this. He later publishes a whole sefer called Eimani Chayma about it, and Chatzko Roth, and many other poskim who held differently than him. But Reb Moshe, held B'Shaloi very, very strongly, and the chuvas span the entire, every volume of Vigis Moshe and Orach Chaim Kemat has one where he reiterates his positions, etc. Now, I just want to highlight, Reb Moshe has many chedushim in these chuvas, and of course it's beyond the purview to get into the sugi of Erevin now and what these machleksim are, about Erevin in big cities, etc. But I want to just highlight a certain nekuda. But before I do that, I just want to share something else. Reb Moshe Mordechai Scholzinger, who we mentioned before, used to give shiurim in Panovich, and on the day of Reb Moshe's Yartzeit, he used to like to say this. This was like his hesped for Reb Moshe. This is what he used to like to share. He would say as follows: in Orach Chaim Chelik Aleph, Tshuva Kuf Lamed Ches is the first tshuva that Reb Moshe handles Erev, and it starts as follows. The tshuva starts off, Be'inyanim Efshalas is Tikkun Erev Brooklyn. That's the name of the shaila. Now, if you look at the heading, it starts off as follows. Erev Chag Shavuos Tafshin Yud Beis. Erev Chag Shavuos, the year is 1952, is the year. Now, the tshuva goes on for pages, anafim, marachis, chedushim, groundbreaking, revolutionary writing that Reb Moshe does in this tshuva. And then he ends off. At the end of the kapitel, it says, Hineni Yedidai, Maikire B'Leiv V'Nefesh, Mavarche V'Chag Sameach. I wish you a good Yom Tif. B'Kabbalas Torah B'Leiv Shalom. You should be zeichet to Kabbalas Torah B'Leiv Shalom. U'Lizkais B'Chag Haba Aleinu L'Kayim Mitzvos Riyas Chagiga V'Simcha B'Beis V'Chira. She'Yibana B'Mehera Yidei HaGoyel Tzedek Moshe Feinstein. Moshe signs off. It's like a 20-page tshuva with anafim. It's a tshuva that forever will live on as like a gold standard tshuva in tshuvas. In all of Shut, that's published, this is a tshuva that every time someone's going to come to talk about the sugi of Erevin, they're going to come back to this tshuva, and that's forever. For as long as Klal Yisrael is learning the Torah, they're going to come back to this tshuva when they talk about Erevin. He would just point out, nothing more needs to be said. It starts off on Erev Chag HaShavuos, and he signs off wishing a good Yom Tif. It's 20 monumental pages, 10 anafim, detail, chidushim, kol Torah kula wrapped up. It starts off Erev Yom Tif, it ends off Erev Yom Tif. That's like the ultimate hesped, I think, that you could give on a person. Was Reb Moshe Mordechai Scholzinger used to say this over. Now, b'seich the tshuva over there. Now, this is the part that's relevant to us. Moshe has a Greisa Chiddush over there where he says like this. He says there's a diik, he makes a diik in a Rashi in Psachim, that in Yerushalayim, even though it was surrounded by walls, that in Yerushalayim they wouldn't make an area of Chatzeris. Now we know that even if you have an area that's Meshutaf, that's owned by many people, that's surrounded by walls, if you don't have an area of Chatzeris that allows every person to be, in joint ownership with each other, you still can't carry there. It says there's one day in Rashi that they wouldn't make an area of Chatzeris in Yerushalayim. Says Rav Moshe why? He says Yerushalayim was a place where people from all over came. B'chol hashana, l'hakrev karbanos, v'lechol ma'aseh sheni. So the Rabbanim, Chazal were afraid, Chashashu, l'shem yiru anashim b'mekayim Yerushalayim u'tukanim b'mechitzas k'mei Yerushalayim. Maybe some outsider, some visitor to Yerushalayim would come, and he would see that in Yerushalayim they're allowed to carry, everything's good, but where he comes from, in his small village, in the Darom somewhere, there's no Erev Chatzeris, there's no Mechitzas, there's no nothing. And he's going to go home, v'yitatlu gam sham. He's going to carry there too. It says, L'fichach le'irvu, k'dei she'yasurim gam b'Yerushalayim. So even though Erev is good, and Erev is necessary, and Erev is possible in Yerushalayim, they didn't make one. So that no one should learn the wrong lesson from it, he says. V'im kain, gam b'Manhattan, he says, by our situation also, people come from all over, people come from places where it wouldn't be possible to make an Erev, or they're out of the Tchum, where they live, a different way, and they're going to come from here, they're going to learn that Erevin is okay and that Erevin is acceptable. That's a bad message. You're sending them home with a bad message. I can't have that. And because of that, Rav Moshe says he's holding by being machmer. One of the reasons Rav Moshe says he's holding by being machmer. This is a psak that's like, and I'll show you the second half of this one, that's mamash in light of what's going on the street. Rav Moshe looked at it and he said, Shabbos is mamash weak. People come, keep Shabbos, the basics. The last thing I need is to give them the impression that you're allowed to carry also. They're going to come for a Shabbos in Fifth Avenue, which was, the Ir Ve'im. They'll come to the Lower East Side, wherever they'll come, and they'll walk away with the impression, carrying Shabbos is fine. I can't send them home with that impression. That could only be negative. In another tshuva that he writes back to Menashe Klein much later on, he says, Menashe Klein wrote to him how important it is that people are trapped in small apartments. They can't go out with their wife, their kids. Pasha going stir crazy on Shabbos. It's Pasha a mitzvah. Free people from their prison cells and make an area for them. That's what Menashe Klein writes to him. Amongst, not to be mocked in it, amongst 11 other critiques and horrors. I'm not trying to make fun. Amongst 11, Groise ha'aras and a real serious tshuva, ha'ara number 11 is this, that people are Pasha locked up in their house and you need to let them go so they can have some Einik Shabbos. Rav Moshe writes, he says, there's a big tzarech fakir from what you're saying. If I allow that, people won't know b'chlal there's an issa to carry. The biggest issa that a person could violate, he says, is to just write off something from the Torah, to forget something from the Torah. Lashkiach the Torah is the biggest issa a person could be violate. Even if you know you're making hashara, nothing bad is going to come out of this. It's not relevant. I'm just not going to talk about a certain chelik of time. I'm just not that part. I'm just going to leave out. He says there's no bigger issa than that. He brings a raya from Marshal and Baba Kama that it's Yehareg Val Yavar, Moshe says. You're mechuyev to be Meiser Nefesh, to not be Mashkiach, a chelik of the Torah. He says, V'afsha anan le gazrin and yosi mashisa b'gemara. Are you going to tell me I can't make my own gzeiros? How could I say that it's a gzeira not to have an area because it's going to cause shikchas HaTorah? Moshe wiggles it around a little bit, and he says, l'chayra, it's already included in some other gzeiros of Chazal, and this is the ultimate no-go. Now, just one last tiny nekuda on this, I'm sorry, is that in the Hapardes, which is like a periodical that came out, it's not an Igros Moshe, this part, there's someone there who writes a kuntris to be matter the Erevin, and then he writes, I showed my whole mimer to Rav Moshe to get his feedback, and Rav Moshe told me as follows, he says, Rav Moshe says, Bevada yesh taimim gedolim, you're not saying Amaratzis. There's many tzadim lahakal, like you're saying, there's also tzadim lahachmer, like I said in my chuvas, he says, and therefore I'll tell you what, I'm not going to be moicha if you want to be mekel, about what you're saying. Now I want you to keep in mind that Rav Moshe's tshuva is pages and pages long, chedushim l'gav chedushim, there's endless, components to Rav Moshe holding its aser. Look at the one he chooses, he says. Me'idach, he says, Heyois that chiddush that I said about Yerushalayim in my tshuva, that, they didn't make an Erev because they didn't want it to get out of hand, because of that, I'm not holding by being mekel. This is many years later, after many fights back and forth, Rav Moshe accepted everyone's critique, Sahin, Aher, Tzirik, they wrote, it's 5 tshuvas later, Rav Moshe writes, I hear you, it's all good. The one that I'm not backing off from is the fact that people are going to think that carrying is mutar on Shabbos. That's the one that there's no concession on my part from. And he continues, and he says, B'chlal, who are you helping? You're helping over Aveira, you're helping people who just want a thing, and he continues. So this is a standalone case where you see this guiding principle by Moshe, the idea that you can't ever be mavater on a chelik of Torah, and that you can't say that this dar is so parutz that for them this is not necessary, and you have to look and see, bika matzah b'gada together. Now there's many more chuvas, and I want to get into them, and we'll continue this. But just next week there's a seasonal topic I want to talk about, so we're gonna digress. One seasonal topic, and then we'll go back to Shabbos in America. Yeah, that's what it is.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.